Greetings, YouTube, and my theory is this. Martin Luther King probably became more of a threat as he embraced class struggle and refused to attack the then burgeoning Black Power movement. See, by the time LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, begrudgingly out of political expediency and to quell militant Black rebellions, and I might add, because Democrats like LBJ did not want to further anger the powerful Dixiecrat layer of the Democratic Party, Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference should not have been seen as a threat to anyone after the Act of 1964 was signed. Yet, Martin Luther King's life was still ended by an assassin's bullet. A lot of the younger activists of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, like Stokely Carmichael, were becoming wary of Martin Luther King's utilization of nonviolence as they in turn were finding an increase of attacks by white supremacists aimed at their protests and organizing. Carmichael and his comrades began to embrace the idea of Black Power, and this in turn was seen as a step in the opposite direction for peace to Martin Luther King, yet he refused to fully attack Carmichael, as according to his own writings, he understood the impatience from the younger sect. So as the civil rights movement began to split between the older layer heading towards a Black conservative and an assimilationist leaning, while the younger layer wanted to go militant with nationalist tendencies, King did find himself in the middle and not trusted by either side. And then later, in April 1967, when King called for the U.S. to pull out of its colonial war in Vietnam, the establishment, in other words, the Democrats, saw this as a sign that MLK was not controllable, and he began to sound as seditionist as the predominant white anti-war movement at the time. The so-called liberal New York Times and Washington Post attacked Martin for his anti-war statements. On top of it all, Martin Luther King began plans to lead the Poor People's March with the intention of closing the Capitol. LBJ was outraged that some 3 years after signing the Civil Rights Act, Martin Luther King actually went left. It seems that King was not pacified or just comfortable with dealing with race and racial discrimination, but saw the one thing that the ruling class loved playing three-card Monte when it comes to people. Either they want you to make a single issue of class or a single issue of race or whatever your given issue is, all the while you stay disempowered. King outwardly attacked both racism and classism. A socialist is definitely anti-capitalist and understands how it feeds off the subjugation and exploitation of working people and people of color who are made to be part of an underclass. Whether we are talking a socialist, as moderate and as reformist as a social democrat, which I would say Martin leaned more towards, or a militant revolutionary socialist looking to dismantle capitalism and replace it with communism. Allow me to read a few excerpts from things that Martin Luther King has actually said. If America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and make it possible for all God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she too will go to hell. Source: Martin quoted in a speech at the Bishop Charles Mason Temple of the Church of God in Christ in support of the Memphis sanitation workers strike on March 18, 1968, 2 weeks before he was assassinated. Call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all God's children. Source: a speech Martin made at the Negro American Labor Council, 1961. And one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you are raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth, When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more, we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. Source: Speech to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Atlanta, Georgia, August 16, 1967. We must recognize that we can't solve our problems now until there is a radical redistribution of economic and political power. This means a revolution of values and other things. We must see now that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are all tied together. You can't really get rid of one without getting rid of the others. The whole structure of American life must be changed. America is a hypocritical nation, and we must put our own house in order. Source: Report to SCLC staff, May 1967. I have a link in the low bar which will go into more quotes that Martin Luther King said that definitely can be considered socialist and anti-capitalist. So as always, we get a leader who, if we do not care to examine, will be given to us by our very enemies. And when they do this, they give us a face that they want us to only recognize, when in fact, who they truly are won't be recognizable to us at all. We have to know and study who our leaders truly are and not who our enemies want us to see. This is the Garage Autonomist.